M. Night Shyamalan back to form as Glass takes #1 at the box office, but the real story? Dragon Ball Super Broly shattering its own genre's glass ceiling, taking in over $10 million over the holiday weekend.
You're listening to The Weekend Take, and now your host, Sean Schaefer.
Hello everyone and welcome to The Weekend Take. I'm your host, Sean Schaefer, and with me this week is director Michael Babbitt, co-owner of Bombshell Studios, and director of the fantasy feature film The Last in Line. Michael, how you doing?
I'm doing fine, Sean. Thanks for having me.
This weekend, we're going to look at the box office weekend that was. A couple new entries into the top 20, including one surprise, and a couple of films left the top 20. And unfortunately for Keanu Reeves, Replicas continues its free fall. But we'll start, as we do with every episode, with the films that left the top 20 this week. We had two such entries. First off was Free Solo, dropping from number 20 down to 24 this week from National Geographic Entertainment. The film took in $264,000, losing about one-third of its screens and dropping 67.7% for a per-screen average of just under $2,700 and a total cume of $13.1 million to this point in its 17th week of release. The other of these two films that dropped out of the top 20 this week was Mary Queen of Scots from Focus Features, dropping to number 22 from the number 19 spot. Mary Queen of Scots this week took in $370,000, a 56.6% drop from last week, losing half of its screens, bringing its screen total down to 405 for a $914 per screen average and bringing its cume up to just over $16 million. Are you familiar with either of these titles and surprised to see either of them leave the top 20 this week?
I'm not particularly familiar with Free Solo, but I do know about Mary Queen of Scots. I mean, even with that, though, with Mary Queen of Scots, its theater loss and its revenue loss is pretty much reflected in losing half of its theaters. It's almost the exact same number. So it actually stayed pretty steady in terms of its revenue.
Yeah, last week the per theater average was roughly around $1,000 as well. So it stayed consistent, even with the loss of theaters, which equaled about the same drop in the weekend take of it.
A lot of the cast in that Mary Queen of Scots film are actually actresses that I really like. You know, period pieces, well, they're difficult. Has there ever been a really, really great period piece? I mean, and I'm not talking about things like Braveheart, you know, an actual period piece that's done super well. I guess The Queen, I'm thinking in terms of other films that were like Mary Queen of Scots.
It is certainly tough with period pieces. I mean, because for those who aren't specifically educated in the time period that they're talking about, a lot of period pieces just look the same and sound the same to the general movie-going audience.
The people that are going to see it and would see that movie are still going to see that movie. It's just not going to be a hugely massive attractor because, you know, the masses are not going to go see a movie like that.
Even with the star power attached to Mary Queen of Scots, as with some other films that we're going to look at in the top 20, star power can only get you so far.
Number 20.
So with that, we're going to enter into the top 20 countdown, and starting at number 20, down from number 13 this week is Replicas. Replicas this week took in $450,000, an 81.1% drop, rather staggering, dropping 270 theaters to bring it to 2,059 screens, a measly $219 per screen average for a cume of $3.6 million. Now this film, as we discussed last week, has roughly a $30 million budget, and with no foreign gross or markets opening in sight, this looks to be a major loss for the studio. It's not going to necessarily be a black mark on Keanu Reeves' permanent record because he'll be fine, because in May, when John Wick Chapter 3 comes out...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, nobody's going to even remember Replicas. Speaking of that, that's one of the things about this movie. I work at a movie theater, and when this movie came out, I was like, what the heck is this movie? They never advertised this movie. This movie got no advertising, no marketing. This movie just suddenly appeared, and I'm not surprised that it's done. Now, I've seen it as well. I don't know if you have.
I haven't.
It's an interesting concept, but it doesn't look like something you wouldn't just see on the Sci-Fi Channel.
Yeah, I mean, I got that feeling from the little bit of marketing and trailers I did see for the film, though they were geared very heavily towards attracting an audience that would go see a Keanu Reeves movie. Going back to the star power argument, like this movie, most of its marketing was geared towards, hey, Keanu Reeves is in this, you know, Neo, John Wick, that guy, he's in the movie, come see it.
I'm not even remotely surprised that this film has tanked as bad as it has.
Yeah, and I mean, I think January really is the month where studios just throw out whatever they got lying around and see if it sticks. I mean, this is one of those instances where the studio really couldn't see any place else to put it where it would have limited competition, but even with limited competition, it's underperforming. I mean, the general consensus is that it's a lackluster film. I mean, you look at Rotten Tomatoes, it only has a 10% Rotten Tomatoes, and CinemaScore, which is based on exit polling from audiences who see the film, rate it at about a C. So it's middle of the pack, average, nothing to write home about, and that's why it's underperforming as much as it has. I mean, even looking at the entire collection of Keanu Reeves' work and how it's done at the box office, Replicas ranks very, very low, especially given that its opening weekend theater count. I mean, right now, Replicas sits at just under $3.7 million, which in the collection of Keanu Reeves' work, there's 48 titles that are tracked that Keanu Reeves has been in as an actor, and it's at 34th place right now.
Oh, yeah, wow.
And it's trailing behind a lot of films that open on many, many fewer screens. I mean, you look at something like Little Buddha that he was in from Miramax, did just under 5 million, and that was released 25 years ago.
That's a weird film.
That is a weird film. Even in the vein of sci-fi and just odd films, I mean, even Johnny Mnemonic did way better than Replicas has done and probably will do.
Wow, that's a throwback.
But again, I don't think this will in large affect Keanu Reeves' drawing power, as we'll all find out.
It's not going at all.
On May 17th.
Number 19.
Now, moving on to the countdown, number 19 is a film that's not taking any kind of hit at all, is A Star is Born, down from number 17 this week. A Star is Born from Warner Brothers took in $639,000, a drop of only 43.2%. It picked up a few theaters, bringing its theater count to 415 for a $1,500 per screen average and a box office cum of just under $205 million on a $36 million budget, and it is in the 16th week of release. So with this film, as I said last week, it did get a bit of padding in its theater count and its per screen average because it did take home a Golden Globe. It won for Best Original Song for the duet Shallow between Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper. But generally, the consensus is that it is a good film. It's a film that's been done before, but It is a good film. Did you see the previous iterations of A Star is Born?
I've seen all three of the others, yes.
And have you seen this one?
No, I have not, because I've seen all three of the others. I mean, it might be a great film, but it's like I know the story. And yeah, I'm sure they're going to make little deviations and derivations of it. I got that. I have so limited time anyway. I don't see enough movies now anyway that I would rather spend my time seeing movies that I haven't seen before. And on a personal level, these sort of like star vehicles, I hate these kind of films.
Oh, yeah? Why is that?
These ones where they're obviously geared towards these two stars and bringing them together. It's like in the theater, they have these plays. One of them in particular is called Love Letters, where they'll bring in famous actors because it's only two actors. And they bring in two famous actors to raise money and to, make everybody go, oh my gosh, it's Alan Alda coming in to do this show at our theater. And I just generally loathe that kind of stuff. It's just pretentious to me. And
I think with A Star is Born, though, one of the things that was a bit of a twist for me was Bradley Cooper stepping behind the camera to direct, even though he was in front of it as the lead. Do you think he made the right choice in that? Or if he really wanted to be taken seriously on the directing side of the house, he should have been the director and maybe cast someone else in the lead?
With a vehicle like this, I mean, I don't personally have a problem with that, but I can guarantee you he had a whole lot of help. Wait, who was the cinematographer on that? It's Matthew Levatic. But, if you look at his body of work, I'll bet 10 to 1 the film probably looks great. So, I mean, he was probably smart enough to surround himself with people that really know what they're doing. So that's going to help him in that case. And, because it's an intimate film and more than likely a lot of the scene work is pretty much just between him and Lady Gaga, that's probably doable. There are some films where I think directors obviously should not have stepped in front of and behind the camera because you could tell the workload. They couldn't handle the workload. But with this, I think it's probably perfectly fine.
It'll be interesting to see how Bradley Cooper fares his next time out as a director.
Yes. Yeah, and depends on what type of film he takes.
Number 18.
Moving on to the countdown to number 18 is Second Act from STX Entertainment, which drops to the number 18 position from number 16. Second Act takes in $670,000 this weekend, roughly a 60% drop, losing a third of its screens, 630 screens, to bring its total down to 1,051, a $637 per screen average, and bringing its cum to $37.7 million. Now, this film's been a talking point for the last 2 weeks on the show, as going into what we were talking about earlier, the idea of star power and that being an attraction to a film. Here we see Jennifer Lopez, who's kind of in her niche in this film, playing a part she's very comfortable in, or at least a style of film that she's very comfortable in, despite currently being on television in shades of blue in a very dramatic and action-based role. But here we find her back in, some familiar skin in the kind of romantic comedy genre that brought her to prominence. Michael, what's your thoughts on second act? Are you much of a romantic comedy guy, or
No. I definitely haven't seen this. We had this in the theater, so I've seen scenes and snippets from it because I happen to do theater walks and stuff like that. But it's definitely not the kind of movie that I'm going to sit down and go see. Now, my wife, on the other hand, will probably see this when this is out on DVD. This is probably something she will definitely enjoy watching, and that's probably when I'll actually end up seeing at least most of it, depending on how much I can sit through. Romantic comedies are just not my kind of movies. I mean, some of them are good. Some of them are actually good, but for the most part, I find them relatively formulaic.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a massive audience for movies like that. So yes, coupled with the fact that it is a formulaic rom-com that people want to go see because they want to see for 2 hours. They want to see something that's going to be happy and they know is going to have a happy ending and it's going to make them feel good when they get done. That's great. And it's got star power with Jennifer Lopez. And this is a niche she does, well.
This property, though, I'm sure makes STX rather happy. As I mentioned, a $16 million budget. It's taking just under $38 million so far domestically. Couple that with what it will likely do, as you mentioned, once it gets to something like a Netflix or streaming service or a video on demand, iTunes and Redbox. I'm sure they're looking at a rather healthy profit from the film.
Number 17.
Moving on in the countdown to number 17, up from number 18, is The Favorite from Fox Searchlight, making $810,000, only a 27% drop from last week. Most marginal of increases in theater count, 5 theaters added to bring its total to 517, just under $1,600 per screen average to bring its cume up to $22.8 million. The Favorite is one of those titles that, as we mentioned last week, receives the benefit of the awards season bump, taking home Best Actress for Olivia Colman from the Golden Globes 2 Sundays ago. Although the director, Yorgos Lanthimos, has a very acquired taste to his body of work. I, out of curiosity, tuned in to watch The Lobster.
Yes. It's just a great film.
You know where I'm going with this. I watched The Lobster 2 nights ago on Netflix, and it made my brain hurt.
Yeah.
Stylistically, it kind of lost me. Dialogue and performance. I mean, I generally like to watch, when I'm watching a movie, I like to watch the actors go through a full range of emotions and to act. And it seems that Yorgos's style is to have his talent deliver in the most monotone, dry manner possible, which I guess lends itself to the strangely dark style of comedy that he works into his films. But I found it to be very difficult to watch, but I watched it to the end just to be able to form a full opinion about it. And I really don't know. This director is just not my cup of tea. I mean,
his films aren't going to be films that you're going to like. You're all sitting around going, "Hey, man, you want to watch a movie? Let's watch The Lobster." No, you're not going to do that with this kind of film. So, I mean, he's definitely a very distinct taste. I love The Lobster. I thought it was really creative and off the beaten path, so to speak. I haven't seen The Favorite yet either, but what I'm imagining, it's got a similar kind of feel to it. And what it looks like in some of the previews, I can see some of that. Although I think he's opened up a little bit from The Lobster. So this is a film that that is on my list to try to get to before it leaves, or definitely in my queue when it comes on Netflix or Amazon Prime. But I also like the actresses. The 3 actresses in this are just really stellar.
Yeah, and actually, I wasn't familiar with Olivia Colman's work until I watched The Lobster, because she is in The Lobster as the hotel manager. And while that part is, I don't want to say small, but it certainly isn't on the scale of Colin Farrell's part or Rachel Weisz's part. I thought that she was great in performing that role. I'm going to have to at least give it the old college try and watch.
Number 16.
So moving on in the countdown to number 16, down from number 12 this week, is a movie that I do want to see in theaters and is another award season darling, is If Beale Street Could Talk from Annapurna Pictures, bringing in $1.6 million, only a 31% drop from last week. Its theater count held steady at 1,018 screens for a 1,600 per screen average and brings its cume up to $10.4 million. Now, this film is the second such venture from Barry Jenkins as director, who previously directed the award winner Moonlight. And with the Academy Award nominations right around the corner, I think that he's looking at adding some more nominations and hardware to his award season shelf. But that remains to be seen until the nominations come out. Michael, making the rounds at the theater, how is this? Has this playing at your local?
This is not playing at our theater, and like Replicas, this is a film I really actually know nothing about. I do know now that hearing some of the awards talk, it's getting some reviews, but I don't even really know what it's about. I'll go look into it. I'll go watch trailers for it. It might be something I do want to see. So, who's the cinematographer? James Laxton. Oh, he did Moonlight. Oh, okay, that's promising because it's coming from the same pedigree that made that film.
Did you get to see Moonlight?
Mm-hmm.
And what were your thoughts on Moonlight?
I thought it was a wonderful piece. I mean, it's just, again, it's had some eclecticness to it that it wasn't formulaic. I find nowadays my theater going, I think my tastes are ranging towards wanting to see things that are different. So Moonlight was great. So if Beale Street could talk, it's probably going to be added to my list.
Okay. And as it should. I mean, it seems to be being added to a lot of people's lists, and I feel that it's held steady at 1,018 screens, no change. I think they're really just holding off until the Academy Award nominations come out, and I think you'll see a pad in that theater count.
Yeah, probably 1,000 screens. Yeah, they'll probably double it. That probably got an early limited release in December just to be able to make the awards consideration, didn't it?
In its initial opening frame, it came out December 14th. It was only in 4 theaters.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I thought.
It expanded to 65 theaters December 28th.
Yeah.
It expanded further to 335 screens on January 4th, and then it reached the level of theaters it's at now. Just last weekend, it expanded from 335 to 1,018.
Right. They nominated for any BAFTAs, do you know?
At the BAFTAs, it's nominated for Original Music and Best Screenplay Adapted.
But that one's in like 3 weeks, so that might give it another bump.
But it'll be interesting to see if Beale Street Could Talk can replicate the award season success that Moonlight did. And if it can, it gives Barry Jenkins a carte blanche to do as he feels moving forward. And I'm sure Annapurna will be right there to back him up.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take. And for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks. Number 15.
So moving on to the countdown to number 15, down from number 10 is Vice, also from Annapurna Pictures, taking in $1.8 million, 42% drop from last week. Lost 550 screens to bring its total down to 1,175 screens. It had just under a 1,600 per screen average and brings its total up to $39.2 million. Now this film, I think, is the polar opposite from If Beale Street Could Talk. Here's Vice, that also took home a Golden Globe 2 Sundays ago for Christian Bale's portrayal of Dick Cheney, but has been on a slide since winning the award, whereas If Beale Street Could Talk has only been holding steady or growing. I think Annapurna knows going into the Academy Awards which horse they want to hitch their wagon to, and it's definitely If Beale Street Could Talk. I think Vice is going to get notoriety for Christian Bale, but I think the film as a whole is just going to kind of, Christian Bale did awesome, but the rest of the film, and do we really need a Dick Cheney movie?
I'm very leery of current event films. Generally, it's something like in the last 20, 30 years about a living person that's still around, that's still, a depiction of them in a fictionalized film. But as a filmmaker, I feel, and especially if I was a filmmaker who had a lot of reach, which the filmmakers on these top 20 lists, they do. I don't personally, but they do. And as a filmmaker, you got to really weigh your responsibility of what information you're putting out there, because there are people that will see movies like this and believe everything that's in them. And to me, that's something that you really got to be careful about. It's like stars who use their stardom as a platform to talk about their politics. You better be really well versed in what you're talking about before you spout out. As a filmmaker, I know what we have to do. I mean, Shakespeare is the greatest of all these writers, story writers. You look at him and he's got these series of plays called the histories, but they're not histories because they're actually depicting, because Shakespeare changed stuff all the time in order to make the story more dramatic. You're trying to tell an interesting story, so you're going to change stuff. And if you change stuff, you might be affecting how history sees that event. If it's like far reaching, like, 300, that's based on a true story. Right. Okay. So we go to see that movie. I'm not going to watch 300 and go, oh my God, this is exactly what happened with the Spartans. I think I'm intelligent enough to know not to do that. But that's so far removed from what we are. It's not going to affect our daily lives. Stuff like this, it can have a real effect on, I don't know. It's just something I'm very leery about.
A lot of filmmakers don't really look at the responsibility of, this is a media that presents information to an audience like anything else, and being so current and so close to the proximity of the actual events like you're talking about, everything presented to them can be perceived to them as being maybe not necessarily factual, but contributing evidence to a narrative that they piece together on their own based on what they see on their newsfeed on Facebook and things like that.
Yes. And especially if the filmmaker has an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're really going to honestly tell a story like that, you need to be a filmmaker that's going to come into this without an agenda. So you can look at it from every possible angle that you can actually look at it from.
Number 14.
Coming in at number 14, and this is a film that has no agenda other than to entertain. Staying at number 14 is Ralph Breaks the Internet from Buena Vista and Disney, taking in $2.1 million, only a small 4% drop from last weekend. Got a theater pad of 382 screens to bring its count up to 1,936. The film averaged 1,100 per screen and has brought its total up to $193.2 million. The film is now in its 9th week of release and is probably anticipating being included in the list of nominations for Best Animated Feature at the Academy Awards. And this film, it doesn't have an agenda. I mean, it's great.
No, it's cute and it's fun. I will say that if you haven't seen it, you go to watch it. In all personal concerns about this movie, my favorite scene is actually the end credit scene.
Yes. I know. See, and it was funny because that was one of the things that almost turned my daughter off to not wanting to see it, because she got so scared about this scene. For those of you who don't know, there's, just to quickly recap, there's a scene.
Oh, this is a spoiler alert, by the way. You should give the spoiler alert here.
No, I mean the scene plays out in its whole in all the trailers.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
The whole scene is in the... I didn't watch the trailer, so I don't know.
Yeah. No, the scene plays out in the trailer where Ralph does what Ralph does. He keeps feeding pancakes to the poor bunny, and Vanellope tells him he should maybe take it easy because he's not paying attention that the bunny is now looks like Violet from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And he's like, no, milkshakes go to the kitty, pancakes go to the bunny. And he stuffs one more pancake into the bunny, and the poor kid sitting in the back seat just hears a knowing that the bunny popped, and the kid screams and freaks out.
It's the funniest scene in the movie.
So my daughter almost didn't want to go see it because she was worried, because she had a similar response to, if you've seen the Emoji Movie.
I have not.
Also in the trailers, there's a scene where they're playing Candy Crush and he gets stuck and the game thinks that he's one of the candies. And so he's like, well, what's going to happen if you match 3? And they're like, well, I don't know. And they imagine they match 3 and same thing, he explodes. My daughter still won't watch that scene. She has to cover her eyes because she gets freaked out. So we had a similar response to this scene in Ralph Breaks the Internet, but we went to see it. The whole movie goes by and it's not there, and then they sneak it in there in the end credits, which at that point, it was just for humor's sake. She got a kick out of it. Just a really fun film all in all. As I mentioned last week, it's already surpassed the first film's take at the box office, and I'm sure sets up what will be a third film somewhere down the line.
Number 13.
So coming in at number 13 this week, down from number 11, is Bohemian Rhapsody from Fox, taking in $2.2 million, only a roughly 30% drop from last week. It lost a couple of theaters, 157 to bring it down to 1,177. Its per screen average sits nicely still at 1,912, and its cume crosses the $200 million mark to bring it up to $201.9 million. The film is in its 12th week of release, and is another one of the films that has gotten a bit of padding from the awards season, as it took home Best Picture and Best Actor for Rami Malek's portrayal of Freddie Mercury. Now, this film has a bit of mixed review, currently sits at a 62% in Rotten Tomatoes, so critically middle of the pack, maybe just above average. But Cinema Score has it ranked as an A, so the people who are seeing it do enjoy it. And I've talked to some people discussing the veracity of past events and how true to real life they were. Mm-hmm. Part of the backlash is that there are some things that people feel are being misrepresented in the life of Freddie Mercury and in the journey of the band Queen. And then there's some people who say that some aspects of it are dead on accurate. It is on my list to see, and it is on my list to see this week once I can dig myself out of this near 2-foot blizzard that we're in. How about yourself, Michael? Have you seen Bohemian Rhapsody? Is it something that you're interested in seeing?
I'm one of those midline people. I thought it was a meh movie. I thought it was middle of the pack. My biggest disappointment is the fact that I wanted the movie to be about Queen and not about Freddie Mercury. I mean, there's nothing wrong with Freddie Mercury. Great. But, Bohemian Rhapsody, the band Queen, I wanted the movie to be about Queen, the band, and about what they went through, and really, not so much focused on him. So, it's a little bit maudlin in places, and I got to tell you, this might irritate a number of viewers or listeners, but the jury for me is still out on what's his name,
Rami Malek, yeah.
I can't tell if he's good or not. He's obviously passable in this, because I didn't come away going, oh, I hate his performance, but I didn't come away going, oh my gosh, I'm seeing the incarnation of Freddie Mercury. And I grew up in the time period of, Queen, and this was a band I listened to. So I really wanted it to be about Queen, the band, not about Freddie Mercury. And then we're going to put the guys from Queen in the movie a little bit.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't heard anybody come back with that opinion. Do they get really in depth at all about any other particular member of the band, or is it really just all about Freddie?
No, it's pretty much all about Freddie. I mean, I'm going to liken this to a popular movie about 20 years ago, the first X-Men movie.
Mm-hmm.
I had the same reaction to the first X-Men movie. It's very disappointing to me, because I wanted it to be about the X-Men, not about Wolverine. And then there's the X-Men that are in it. So, I would have liked this to be much more of an ensemble. It's not a terrible movie. I didn't think it was terrible. It's well worth seeing. I mean, if for anything, you get to listen to a lot of great music.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's a large part of it is, because I'm a fan of the band Queen and their music. I've heard a lot about the recreation of the Live Aid concert, and I was a bit too young for the Live Aid concert, even when it was televised, to watch it. So now to kind of witness it recreated on the big screen, I think will feel pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary event, and that's actually a sequence that's really well done. That's well done.
Number 12.
Moving on in the countdown to number 12, up from number 15 this week is Green Book from Universal. Green Book took in $2.2 million, a 5.4% increase from last week. It got some theaters added to its count. It increased 170 theaters to bring its count to 912 theaters, just under a $2,500 per screen average to bring its total up to just under $42 million. This film is in its 10th week of release, but as the films we were talking about previously, it does get to have that award season glow attached to it, as Green Book took home a couple of Golden Globes 2 Sundays ago. And also looking ahead to the Academy Awards is probably looking at some nominations as well. My first and foremost reason for seeing it is just to see Viggo Mortensen play on screen, as I do enjoy Viggo Mortensen's work, even outside of what most people know him as is Aragorn from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. But he's done a great body of work prior to and since then.
Yeah, definitely since then, because his stuff with Cronenberg.
Mm-hmm.
History of Violence and
yes.
Eastern Promises. Yeah, I mean, that's jeez.
Yeah, I mean, History of Violence is great. Eastern Promises as well. Even The Road, which wasn't, I felt, a really true adaptation to, or even an interesting adaptation of the story, was still a good performance on his part.
But I have not seen, this is one I have not seen. So
again, it's another story that looks at some of the issues in a time period when we were still dealing with segregation and how we as a society deal with things that come up and conflicts that arise as a result of it. So how it handles it is part of what draws you into the story. But I am looking forward to seeing this get a bit more of an expansion heading into the rest of award season so that I can check it out as well, because a couple of my local cineplexes aren't carrying it. So I'm hoping that it gets a couple more theaters padded in the coming weeks heading into the Oscars race.
I'm not sure it's playing anywhere here either. I don't think we've gotten it yet. I know our theater hasn't gotten it, and some of the more local, some of the smaller independent theaters that get some of the more offbeat releases, I don't think it's there yet.
And hopefully, though, the award season buzz will bring it to some of those markets that it hasn't reached yet.
Number 11.
Well, moving on in the countdown to number 11 now, down from number 9, is The Mule from Warner Brothers, which took in $3.5 million, only a 38.2% drop from last week, losing roughly 640 screens to bring its total down to 2,688. The film averaged $1,300 per screen and brings its total to just under $97 million in its 6th week of release. Now, the good news is Clint Eastwood has come forward and done an interview and said, no, this is not his swan song. This is not his last go-around, which I'm very happy to hear. He said that he may reduce his workload a little bit, but he's not going anywhere. This is another example of someone who is in a vehicle as a director and lead actor. Going back to us discussing Bradley Cooper earlier, Clint Eastwood is far more experienced at doing it and without causing too much of an argument, because I don't think there is one because there's not a big enough sample size yet, is far superior at doing it, both being behind the camera and a lead on camera at the same time.
Yeah, well, he's probably one of the best examples of somebody that can actually do it. But I also think he's pretty savvy about when he chooses to do that. So, and what roles to take that in.
He's a great example of what we were saying that Bradley Cooper probably did, is what Clint Eastwood does regularly. So we said that Bradley Cooper probably surrounded himself with all the right people to help him make this film and make it well, whereas Clint Eastwood works with the same people.
Yes. Yeah.
He's had the same crew, the same everything for all these films where he's been both behind and in front of the camera, and even in endeavors where he's just been behind the camera. But ultimately, everything comes down to talent. And I think that Clint Eastwood is incredibly talented both as an actor and as a director, which lends itself to both critical and commercial success for his films.
Agreed, yeah. I will be honest and say that I'm much more of a fan of his work behind the camera than in front of the camera. It's not that I don't like his work in front of the camera. I think it's great. But I think his genius really shines when he's behind the camera. This guy knows the medium of film. There are very few directors who are so in tune with the very specific medium that they're working in. And I think Eastwood is one of them.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, he's spent an entire lifetime in the industry, so he's not the case where he fakes it till he makes it. He's been making it for close to half a century. So now we're at the point in the countdown where we're going to take it aside and take a moment and talk with our co-host, this week being Michael Babbitt. As I mentioned, he is the co-owner of Bombshell Studios and the director of the fantasy feature film The Last in Line. Michael, tell us a little bit about The Last in Line and what you do and about yourself.
Well, the film is it's an original fantasy-based film, so it's not based on any other proprietary work or anything like that. It's something created by myself and the writer Christopher Lee Jones. He and I worked a long time together creating the backstory and the world for the film, and it's set in that, and it's a story about 12 men and women who are part of a mercenary unit, and they're tasked with their final mission to be a suicide mission, and it's the last 90 minutes in their lives and how they're going to handle that situation. So we finished principal photography in 2017. The film premiered last November in 2018, and we are currently getting ready to go on a comic book convention tour to different comic book conventions around the country. We've already got 9 different conventions lined up in March, April, and May, that if you're interested in seeing what conventions we're going to be at, you can go to our website, which is 40kilo.bombshellstudios.com.
I'll be sure to put a link in the episode's description.
Cool. So you can see what conventions we're going to be at there. And then we are also working on a distribution deal, working with a sales agent to get the film distributed, to have it show up in things like video on demand, Amazon and Netflix, and possibly the big news is even a Walmart release. They think the film could potentially do a Walmart release. So you might see us in the DVD Blu-ray racks in Walmart.
That would be great. Now you mentioned the Last in Line and the material is completely original, and that you've been developing it for some time with Christopher Lee Jones. Everything that led you to the creation of this property is from a lifetime of being it's from a lifetime of being a dungeon master. Is that correct?
You're going to out me, aren't you? Yes. I am a longtime avid Dungeons and Dragons player. I've been playing since 1979. And for those of you that don't know, that was long before it was the cool thing to do. That was when we used to get harassed for being people that like to pretend we were elves or barbarians and in a fantasy world. Yes, I've been doing that for, good Lord, that's what, 40 some years. Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, honestly, I think that lends itself to being a much more rich world that we're going to go into. Is that it's not just, well, we'll throw some wizards here and some warriors there and some archers there. It's like, well, no, you've created a world that you're passionate about. And, I know firsthand that it shows both in the writing and in the performances and in everything to do about the film. And the great thing, talking about surrounding yourself with all the right people, I mean, the great thing about The Last in Line, not to pat myself on the back as the director of photography of the film,
You can totally pat yourself on the back. You should.
But also, I mean, just the props and the wardrobe and the set. I mean, everybody involved in that film had the same level of passion that you did and Christopher Lee Jones did in creating the world, and it shows. And I know that in our discussions in private about it, but now we're talking about distribution. That traditional distribution wasn't always the end goal, right?
No, it wasn't. It was never the end goal. Was just to make a feature film. I wanted to shoot a feature film. The whole reason I did it was, well, I want to make a feature film, and I want to know that we'll get this feature film done. What happens after that with it is all gravy. It was the whole concept behind it was done to really just get us to the point of actually premiering it, letting people see it.
And again, I'm talking about the idea of traditional distribution being people want theatrical and Netflix and things like that. But I know when we were talking, the idea was like, this would be wonderful if it just became a mainstay in the Comic-Con circuit.
Right.
And if distribution happens, great, wonderful. But this is something that in its lore runs very deep. So there's this 90 minutes, this 90 minutes that you're going to watch when you watch the movie. But the thing that makes the film so wonderful and the property so wonderful is that everyone has a backstory and it's known. It's known at least by the people who created it. It can go so many different directions and it's mapped out. And everything to do about the world, the landscape, the geography, the topography, everything was created from scratch from yours and Christopher's mind. It's something that if someone came along and wanted to be, a major benefactor to the project, there's so many places that it can go. It's certainly not limited to a 90-minute film.
We've got an entire world that can be explored, and you only get to see a very, very teeny tiny part of it. There's so much lore that we've created that we have ideas for to help when the designers and everybody was coming to terms with the film, that I wanted to be rich, that we could immerse ourselves in it. So it was important that it wasn't just the stuff that was in front of the camera, but it was all the stuff that was outside the camera and outside of the barn that it takes place in, outside the town that the barn is in, the world itself. So there's a lot there.
Just to kind of touch briefly on methods of directing, I know that Akira Kurosawa is your absolute favorite director.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about, if you can. I know that there were, at least in particular, one very Kurosawa thing to do that was done with the actors of this film. Each one of the broken swords carries with them what's called their soul hutch. And their soul hutch is what they keep their most prized possessions in, that upon death is turned over as a last will and testament to whomever they leave it to. So every one of our broken swords, all 12 of our actors, all had a soul hutch. Now, we only ever see the contents of, I believe it's two soul hutches, but every single broken sword on set had a soul hutch and had items in it that was relevant to their character. And even if they themselves didn't particularly know, you would discuss with them what those contents were and why it was important to them. Even though we never ever see these things on camera, to me, at least in my study of Kurosawa, that's a very kind of, to me, Kurosawa method.
Well, thank you. I'll take that. For me as a director, one of my favorite places to get as in the relationship, whether it's the production team or an actor, is when I'm trying to spark their imagination, and the moment that I see it spark. Because the moment that I see it spark, I slowly stop doing anything and I just let them go. That ends up being, the place where they add their creativity to the ideas that I've already presented, and we get something that's far better than our individual inputs would have been. I like that kind of stuff. I do that kind of stuff all the time in my films.
All of it shows on screen because everybody that was a part of that on the acting side of the house, I think, turned in fantastic performances, which when coupled with, like I said, the attention to detail to the set and the props and the weapons and the story and the lore all make for a pretty incredible film that I hope a lot of eyes get to watch in 2019.
I hope so too.
When would be the earliest that perhaps a general audience could check out the film?
We can't put it anywhere right now. I mean, the comic book convention thing is fine. So the general public, if you really want to see it, check out where we're going to be showing it for the cons. Go to the con on the day and you'll be able to see the movie. But to see it, in your home, like on Amazon Prime, I can't just put it up on Amazon Prime right now as a placeholder, because most of these sales agents are trying to work to get, and this is something a lot of people don't know about the industry, they're trying to work to get either nationwide or international wide, and in our case, they want the rights internationally to basically every medium and because that's how they're going to make money as well. But they want to take charge of that. And if we've already gotten it up there, that makes the stakes for them a little less, because that's a place that we've already put it. Even if we take it down, it's already been available. So that's sales that they're not going to generate. They're also discussing taking it to AFM in November. AFM is the American Film Market. It's the largest film network convention in the world. Hundreds of distributors, sales agents, producers go to this thing looking for movies to purchase and buy and stuff like that. So this might get taken there as a potential for that. I don't want to lose any momentum, but I'm not sure how much momentum we have. but the comic book convention thing might start to create some momentum. And I don't know how fast this thing with the sales agent is going to go. It could be over the next month or so, and by that time we'll be starting the convention circuit, so everything will be fine. So we're hoping sometime in February and March the public should be able to get their hands on it.
Okay, so what is the Comic-Con going audience's first opportunity to check out The Last in Line? What's the first on the calendar for The Last in Line at the comic conventions?
February 22nd to the 24th. We don't have a specific date yet, but it's at Mysticon in Roanoke, Virginia. And then the next 5 appearances are in Aiken, South Carolina, Frederick, Maryland, Eastridge, Tennessee, and Williamsburg, Virginia. But that's all on the front page. You can always see that, the whole convention schedule. The next upcoming 5 you can see on the website, and then there's a calendar right beneath it that shows you everything that we have.
Okay, great. And the website again was 40kilo.bombshellstudios.com?
Yes, sir.
All right. So everyone check that out. Check out the calendar. Well, Michael, we're going to get back into the rest of our top 20, but definitely thank you for sharing that with us. And everyone, please go check out that website for the calendar for the comic conventions. Bombshell Studios is also on Facebook. They have a page there where updates are posted as well.
Mm-hmm. And Twitter and Instagram. You can find us there.
Great. Thank you again, Michael, for that. And
thanks for sharing. Thanks for letting me share.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take. And for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks. Number 10.
So coming in at number 10, down from number 8 this week, is On the Basis of Sex from Focus Features. It takes in just under $4 million, a 34% drop from last week. Got a little bit of a theater pad with 34 theaters being added to bring its total up to 1,957. The film had just over a 2,000 per screen average to bring its total up to $16.8 million, and it's in its 4th week of release. This film, as I mentioned last week, and I think moving forward, is going to be a bit of a dark horse going into the remainder of the awards season. Didn't get any nominations or wins at the Golden Globes, but I think it is the exact opposite of something like Vice. Here we see another film about a person who is still living and their journey, but doesn't necessarily in a heavy-handed manner tell you about its objective, its agenda. That's not to say that it doesn't have thematic elements to it, particularly in gender disparity and trying to break a class ceiling in the case of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but it's not so ham-fisted that it's just bludgeoning you over the head with it the whole film. It is there. And I said this last week and the week prior, who would have thought now in 2019 that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was going to be such a marketable entity?
That's funny. I just have to say, this is a movie that I haven't seen this one yet either, but this is one I do want to see because I absolutely adore Felicity Jones. I think she's phenomenal in everything she does. I don't know what it is about her, but I just think she has a quality that she brings to all the characters that I really enjoy watching her on screen, watching her work. So knowing she's the vehicle in the film, I'm looking forward to seeing what she does with it.
It's continuing to perform well in this time of year. It's to see, well, what changes with nominations and wins. That's one of the things that always seems to be a kind of a bit of a merry-go-round around this time of year, is films will shuffle to all different kinds of strange places on the countdown based on how well they perform, at the various award shows.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
Again, though, I'm just happy to see Focus Features making films that I actually want to see. I was worried that long gone were the days of Lost in Translation and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. I felt almost the death throes was when they put out that Marie Antoinette film with Kirsten Dunst, but
oh, geez,
they were able to survive through that and have a bit of a resurgence, somewhat as much as a phoenix rising from the ashes, and now are producing thought-provoking, intelligent films again.
Number 9.
Coming in at number 9, down from number 7, is Bumblebee from Paramount, making $4.6 million, a 35% drop from last week. It lost roughly 600 screens to bring its total down to 2,711 screens, a 1,700 per screen average, and it brings its cume up to $115.9 million. As with any of the Transformers properties, there's adventure and action, but this one is meant to be a little bit different, and from what I can tell based on reviews, it is different. It has a bit more of a sweet side to it, but yeah, I don't know. To me, it's still a Transformers film. It's hard to get past it.
It's actually probably the best of the bunch. It's very sweet. Haley Steinfeld, yeah, she's definitely an actress I'm going to continue to keep an eye on because I just think she's dynamite. There's one thing that almost ruins the movie for me, and that's John Cena. I don't know him as a person, but as an actor, he really needs help. He tries so hard to make things intense and cool, and it's painful to watch at times.
In theaters, I've only ever seen him in comedic roles, well, whether it was Trainwreck or Blockers. Is he trying to play serious, like action guy, or is he trying to be comedic relief in this film?
He's the action film guy. He's like Arnold Schwarzenegger from the throwbacks to the 80s action films and stuff like that. And he's trying so hard to be that. It's like, dude, just talk.
Well, Dwayne Johnson, he is not by any stretch of the imagination. And it's unfortunate because people are going to draw a lot of parallels between the two, both having backgrounds in professional wrestling and as entertainers, right, and then trying to be kid friendly and then moving into being box office stars. And Dwayne Johnson is most certainly a box office star.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas John Cena...
Yeah. Anyway, I don't need to go further in that. But the rest of the movie, it's sweet. You get to hear Bumblebee.
Oh, okay.
Which is kind of nice to finally hear what Bumblebee really, because Bumblebee, the whole thing is his voice box is broken, right? Mm-hmm. Well, you find out how that happens in this movie. But it's a sweet movie. It's got heart.
But as I've said before, you have to look at this as a Transformers property, and
But it's not directed by Michael Bay.
Oh, I know. The only reason that we're even talking about this and the fact that people are giving it a decent score walking out of the theater is because it's not directed by Michael Bay.
Actually, if you want to start with the Transformers movies, if you haven't seen any, or even if you have seen any, you could basically decide to watch this and think of it in terms of this is how the story begins. And all the other Transformers movies no longer exist. Now we're beginning the Transformers movies.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what Paramount's thinking was with Bumblebee, was let's just get away from what people expect a Transformers movie to be, give us a fresh start and reboot, and, we'll see. Maybe Bumblebee leads to a whole new retelling of the Transformers franchise. I guess, it remains to be seen.
Number 8.
Moving on to the countdown to number 8, down from number 6, is another franchise that's trying to make a return, is Mary Poppins Returns from Buena Vista and Disney, taking in $5.2 million, a 31% drop from last week. It lost about 443 theaters to bring its count down to 2,810. The film averaged just over 1,800 per screen and has brought its total to $158.7 million. As I've been pretty vocal about the last 2 weeks, I know I'm going to have to go see this film because I have a 7-year-old daughter. But I'm not as excited as I feel like I should be going to see it because I do like Mary Poppins. I like the original Mary Poppins.
Did you just actually call Mary Poppins a franchise? Did you start it up saying another franchise that's trying to make its way back?
Right. I should have said another property that's trying to make a return, but
it's kind of funny. Mary Poppins is a franchise. That's awesome. Mary Poppins Returns. Mary Poppins Forever. Mary Poppins and Robin.
Yes, exactly. That's what Disney does. Disney tries to make a franchise out of everything. I mean,
and they probably will with this. You're absolutely right. I just thought it was kind of because it is
just consider it that it's predictive and that I'm a fortune teller. I don't know. I wanted to be as excited to see this, and the trailers made me feel very nostalgic about when I watched the first one on home video and stuff like that growing up and how much I loved the first one. But that's about as far as it got. Once I started seeing more and more marketing materials and the nostalgia factor wore off, I had to look at it as a film and as a piece of entertainment. And I'm like, no, I'd rather pop in the Blu-ray or DVD of the original.
I actually have not seen this, but my wife has. She took her niece, who is 6 or 7, and frankly, she said the niece was bored out of her mind. I don't know what that means. I think this is a huge nostalgic movie for the people that were raised on the original Mary Poppins. I honestly don't even think this is marketed to kids.
No, it's totally marketed to fans of the predecessor of the first film, and the hopes that they have children, nieces, nephews, maybe even grandchildren, or whatever, that they can bring it to, so that they can have their own Mary Poppins, so they can have that common interest, which is much like what happened with the Grinch earlier in the Christmas season. Like this new Grinch came out that was for people who 20 years later than Jim Carrey's Grinch can now have their own Grinch, and I think that
that movie pissed me off. So don't get me started on that movie.
I won't do that, but I think that's what is happening now. I think that there's a nostalgia trend in Mary Poppins. I feel this is the same thing. Like, here it is again. Okay, people know the songs and they sing along and things like that, and we're just going to create it for a whole new generation. And you created it for a generation, but really you marketed it to the previous generation.
It's sort of reminiscent of the problem that I'm having with Disney's live action remakes that they're doing now. I'm not really interested in seeing almost all of them because they really are just remakes, just with live action. Krista sat down to watch Beauty and the Beast the other night. I sat down to watch the first 20 minutes of it, and I left because I'd rather watch the animated version.
Number 7.
Moving on to the countdown now, we're up to number 7. Down from number 5 this week is Escape Room from Sony, which took in also $5.2 million, a 41% drop from last week. Marginal loss in theaters, only lost 8 screens to bring its total down to 2,709. The film averaged just over $1,900 per screen and has brought its cume up to $40.7 million in its third week of release, which on a $9 million budget is almost a surefire way to get yourself made into the latest in horror film franchises.
Yes, and you know what? You know what's interesting to me about this movie?
What's that?
It's PG-13.
Oh, you know what? I wasn't even aware of that. It's PG-13. Huh.
Yes, which is a really interesting dichotomy for me because, it does reek of that low-budget horror franchise kind of idea. The Saw franchise, the Hostel franchise, and not quite that over-the-top horror, but this one's PG-13. It really did do quite well. But if it had been a rated R movie, would that have actually raised the total gross, or would it have lowered the total gross, do you think?
I think it would have lowered the total gross because I think other films would have seen boosts in ticket sales of people buying tickets to these other movies to sneak into Escape Room.
It's possible, yeah.
So, that begs the question then. Okay, now you've made enough money, you've greenlit a sequel. Is your sequel rated R, or do you stick to your guns and you try and make a PG-13 still?
And now is this going to be the thing where the horror franchises are not going to move away? Because the PG-13, I think, statistically and historically, PG-13 movies always do better than rated R movies, don't they?
There's no restriction on the age. It's just a suggestion that if you're not 13, you should have a parent with you.
So are we going to see a rash of these pseudo horror movies? And then that begs the question, how much is this going to push the landscape for what is a PG-13 movie and what is an R movie?
I honestly feel like the whole rating system is so subjective as it is now. I mean, I've seen stuff that's rated PG-13 that curses just as much as an R-rated film, but I think it's just the way it's presented. The MPAA really, it's antiquated at this point.
Right, but if they want to start moving horror franchises into a PG-13 movie, how much are they going to try to push that envelope, still trying to get into the PG-13 cutting?
I don't know. I mean,
I'm going to get on my bandwagon again. I wish people would just tell their stories and not worry about what the rating's going to be. Oh, but we have to because, we want to market. It's a business. This is why I make no money.
Number 6.
So on that note, moving up to number 6 in countdown, down from number 3 is as formulaic as it gets, is A Dog's Way Home from Sony, taking in $7.1 million, a 36.8% drop from last week. No change in its theater count, stays at 3,090 theaters, averages $2,300 per screen for the weekend to bring its total up to $21.2 million. Again, this film is really as formulaic and cliche as it gets. I mean, this is a story that's been told a million times before. The writer of this film, who also is the writer of other films such as A Dog's Purpose, this is playing to their strengths, and Sony knows that this is the best option they could put into theaters right now for a family film alternative that isn't called Mary Poppins. And Mary Poppins, having already been out for 5 weeks, they were trying to capitalize on the fact that, well, every family who wanted to see Mary Poppins is going out to see it. Let's give them something new to see. But it's meant to be entertainment and those awe moments for a family, and it's been working because, $18 million budget.
This is the kind of movie that's going to be that you know exactly what you're getting when you go into this movie.
It is.
I don't think
But no surprises.
No.
But that's just it. I mean, there's no surprise. You know exactly what you're going to get, but you see the cute puppy on the screen, and now we've got to go see it because this is another film that I'm going to be sitting through because I have a 7-year-old daughter. My daughter loves films like this. She loves like Santa Paws and Pup Star and Beverly Hills Chihuahua. Like I'm going to see this. So I know I'm going to go see this, and Sony knows you're going to go see it, and Sony knows that what an adult ticket price costs, and so that's why we are at $21 million and not much less, because unattended minors can't go see this film by themselves. As I said last week, though, I do expect A Dog's Way Home to overall drop at a much faster pace than Mary Poppins. I see Mary Poppins hanging around the box office longer than A Dog's Way Home.
Yeah, probably.
It's another formulaic film with a preconceived notion of how it was going to perform, and that's how the budget was allocated to it.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks. Number 5.
Moving on to the countdown now, we're up to number 5. Down from number 4 this week is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, also from Sony, taking in $7.2 million, only a 19.8% drop from last week. It saw a small drop in its theaters. It lost 317 screens to bring its total down to 2,712. The film averaged just under 2,700 per screen and has brought its total up to $158.2 million.
How about that only 20% drop off? That's pretty darn good.
It is, and that's, I think, is a testament to the strength and the entertainment value of the film. I have gone to see this film, as I mentioned earlier. I took my daughter to see it, and it's incredibly entertaining. Visually, it's awesome to watch. It's got good script, good story, good characters, and has set itself up very nicely for its own universe of characters and spin-offs, as now we've been introduced to all these different versions and iterations of Spider-Man.
Spider-Ham!
Yes, Peter Porker. And this was the one instance that I can recall where Sony took one of Marvel's toys and didn't break it.
I would really like to couple this with the discussion of the next film on the list. So I'm going to table everything I have to say about Spider-Man right now until we get to the next film on the list.
Number 4.
Moving on in the countdown, we're at number 4 now. Down from number 2 this week is Aquaman from Warner Brothers, taking in $10.3 million, a 40% drop from last week. Small drop in theaters, only saw a loss of 388 screens to bring its total down to 3,475 screens. Still a lot of screens to be on, and it has just under a 3,000 per screen average to bring its total up across the $300 million mark to $304.3 million. It crossed the $1 billion mark worldwide last weekend at the box office and just continues to climb. Still has some foreign markets to open up in yet, so I can only imagine that number will continue to climb. But my ongoing theme with Aquaman is that I think it's setting up people who become fans of DC Extended Universe films a bit of a disappointment, because Aquaman felt like Marvel light to me as far as how it approached the film. But I know, Michael, you have an opinion on this. So how do you feel about Aquaman?
I was frankly bored to tears. And I think I think I'm starting to notice something with these large tentpole superhero movies, that the future for me with the superhero movies is more in the vein of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse than it is with the Aquamans. I think for me, after I watch Avengers Endgame, I'm probably going to step away from them for a while, because Aquaman was stuff that I kind of felt there was no heart to this film. This film was like 5 minutes of actually interesting story with 2 hours and 5 minutes of gorgeous cinematography and special effects. But there's 5 minutes of story that could have been a very interesting story. They just feel to me like they're starting to take on traits of the Transformers movies. They're nothing but spectacle, and you're losing the human connection to the story. It's there. I think Aquaman had its moments. There were some great moments there, but they were so few and far between. Whereas Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, that movie has so much heart to it. There was so little of that in Aquaman.
To my earlier point, though, looking ahead, and I talked about this a little bit last week, like I said, Aquaman to me felt like Marvel light. It felt like it was an attempt to make a DC film that was modeled very much after the formula that Marvel does in making its films. And so, there's moments of levity and the stakes are raised, but it's not so dark and serious. But it's a formula that DC in particular cannot keep up moving forward.
You've got Shazam coming up in March. which, I grew up reading the Shazam comic books. I completely understand changing the mediums and stuff like that. Things get rewritten, you change things. But the tongue-in-cheek lightheartedness of this film, I'm not sure how much I'm going to like it, because in the original Shazam, when Billy Batson turns into Shazam, they're two different people. It's not Billy Batson in Shazam's body.
Right.
It's more like it's Billy Batson as a fully grown, mature man. But the one thing about that movie, though, it looks like it could be small enough that it might be more human and it might be more enjoyable in that sense.
Talking about how they take their interpretation of Shazam, I've kind of felt the same way moving into when they first announced Aquaman. Nothing that I remember about Aquaman felt the same going into the movie.
No, that's actually started in the 80s. In the mid 80s, there was this huge comic book thing that DC did called The Crisis of Infinite Earths, where they did this long 12-issue run. This is a bunch of comic book geek stuff, so I'm about to geek out here. And then they rebooted a number of the franchises, and Aquaman was one of the heroes that got one of the biggest drastic makeovers. In fact, in the original reboot, he actually lost an arm, and his arm was replaced with a harpoon. But if you think about Aquaman in terms of this is the guy who can harness the power of the oceans, that's not just talking to animals. If you're actually the king of the seven seas, I'm willing to bet if you stretch your imagination, you can see where that could lend to somebody being pretty damn powerful. So the interpretation they have of Aquaman, I like it. And as I said, there's some things in Aquaman that I do like. I don't mind the character at all. I didn't mind any of the characters. I just don't think they got nearly enough to do. And I don't think that the film focused nearly as much on his transformation from being this loner who walks his own path and is not going to listen to anybody, doesn't want to be a king, still thinks he's a half-breed, into this person who takes on this mantle. They gave it lip service.
Number 3.
Moving on in the countdown to number 3 is our first of 2 new entries this week, and a huge surprise, as it wasn't even listed in the industry expectations for the weekend being in the top 10, is Dragon Ball Super Broly from Funimation Studios, taking in a monstrous $10.6 million on a now reported 1,233 screens for a per theater average of $8,640 per screen, and a cum after 5 days of $21 million. This is something completely out of left field. Here is an anime title that gets dropped into the mainstream market with essentially no marketing whatsoever, except very targeted advertisements to their fans and target demographics that just explodes at the box office. I mean, $10.6 million for an opening weekend for an anime? I mean, anime is in small doses known in a lot of different mainstream. Like everyone knows Pokemon, and for a lot of part, people know like Yu-Gi-Oh! And things like that. And Dragon Ball Z is another one of those titles, but anime typically doesn't put up numbers like this. It's such a niche category, such a niche genre, at least in the United States. The Walt Disney of Japanese animation, Hayao Miyazaki, who's responsible for titles like Howl's Moving Castle, Spirited Away. These are all films that have won Academy Awards, or at least been in the conversation for Academy Awards. And at best, a Hayao Miyazaki title has done was Spirited Away, and it only made $12.4 million its entire run. Just after 5 days, Dragon Ball Super Broly is the third highest grossing anime title in the US of all time. What can we extrapolate from this film's performance?
This film was nowhere on my radar. I know nothing about this film at all. So what's surprising is I would be interested to see, obviously I'm not the demographic for this because I've never seen any advertisement for this film. But whatever the demographic is for this film, I wonder how much marketing they saw. That's the lesson they should learn on how well they market it, how well they targeted their market, because obviously they did it enormously well.
Yeah. I mean, when I first saw it, because obviously I track the daily box office as well, this film opened up on a Wednesday, and it took number 1 on that Wednesday with a large number. But my first blush response was, well, it's probably something like a Fathom event, where it's like, oh, for one night only, come see in theaters, the new Dragon Ball Super before it comes out on Netflix and streaming and Blu-ray and everything on Friday or something like that. And it was going to be this, but then Thursday it was still number one. And then Friday it put up a big number. And then here we are talking about it on Sunday, looking at it sitting at number 3 with over $10.5 million.
It's a huge surprise. When I saw that on the list, when you sent it to me this morning, I was like, holy crap, what is this movie?
Yeah. It seems like it must be targeted because to open in, 1,233 screens, I think they knew exactly what markets they were going to open it in for those 1,233 screens because they didn't give it a wide release. I think that they knew exactly who they were catering to, exactly who they were going to put this in the market for, and at exactly the right size with exactly the right marketing. So if anything can be taken away from this is that other people in different studios should observe what Dragon Ball Super did in its marketing, because I bet they didn't spend nearly the marketing that some of these other titles in the countdown did. I think it had a fantastic opening weekend. I think that alone is enough to put a feather in Funimation Studios' cap. I am curious, though, to see what this does for other anime titles, moving forward, because there are other animes that are more contemporary that have as rabid of a fan base as Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball Super and all the iterations of it have had over 20 plus years. It'll be interesting to see what it looks like next week. This is a title I'll be tracking closely when we report again next Sunday.
Number 2.
So moving on to the countdown, we're up to number 2. Down from number 1 this week is The Upside from STX Entertainment. The Upside takes in $15.6 million, only a 23% drop from last week, which is admirable. It got a bit of a theater boost. It got 240 screens added to it to bring its total to 3,320 screens, just over $4,700 per screen average, and it's brought its cume up to just under $44 million in its second week of release. So The Upside last week, I felt going into this week was going to see a traditional 50% drop. I'm wrong, only a 23% drop, which is, again, very admirable.
Yes.
Now, whether that word of mouth was about the film or about a lot of the politicizing behind the film, that is something that's not tangible or can be measured.
Well, something that's interesting that I noticed, because I heard a little bit about the whole politicizing thing with, the Oscar thing with Kevin Hart. Everybody that has come to our theater to see The Upside, first of all, they've all been, I would say almost exclusively, they've all been 30 and above demographic age. And every one of them that has come out has said they really enjoyed the film. And it's been running at our theater for 2 weeks and probably seen a good several hundred people come out of that movie. And I asked them because, what do you think about the movie? I usually ask everybody what they think, what the movie is are coming out. Nobody said they didn't like this film.
Yeah. Did anybody come out of it, though, saying, man, they really should have got an actual handicapped person to play that part and not Bryan Cranston? Well, because I don't know if you're aware, but that was a big to-do this past week.
You whatever. I'm sorry.
There was a big to-do last week, actually, shortly after the opening weekend, that Bryan Cranston, in an interview, essentially had to defend himself at playing a quadriplegic. I don't know. The way I feel about it is like, that's not something that people should be complaining about. Like, an actor's job is to act. An actor's job is to take on challenges and take on roles that are not within their comfort if they're an actor who wants to challenge himself. And here's Bryan Cranston, who takes on a challenge as an actor of being a quadriplegic. Well, they say that if you can't do it with your lines, you do it with body language. And here he is not able to really do anything with his body language. So it's a challenge for him as an actor. To then jump on his case about it because the studio should have hired an actor who was wheelchair bound for the part. I mean, come on. I mean, I'm sorry. Like, maybe I upset some people with this, but I think that's one of the most ridiculous things that I've heard. And a studio, under no circumstance, is going to take a chance with $37.5 million invested in this film on a complete unknown just to satisfy putting someone who has the same handicap in the role because they may understand the part better. I get the idea behind the method of it. Can't we just enjoy the art of this film? Like, can we not enjoy the story?
Well, the difference is we're not telling a true story. Okay, so maybe this guy is an actor and they're also somebody that's handicapped. That's going to be so few and far between and so rare, and they're not a name. Again, this coming back to why I don't make any money. I want to make movies because I want to tell interesting stories. I don't care two shits about ratings, about whether or not anybody else likes the movie. I don't care about, I want to tell my story, and I need to tell my story, and I'm going to try to tell my story the best way that I can tell my story. That's the art. That's where the marketers come in, and the business side of show business comes in, where they figure out what's the best way that we can reach the biggest common denominator and make the most amount of money out of this. I'm sorry, but one, your capabilities as an actor are completely unknown, and you have $37 million invested in this budget. If they were going to make it with you, the movie wouldn't have gotten made.
As harsh as it is, this is a business, and the harsh reality of it is that you're in a business to make a profit.
For things like that to happen, it has to be very specific cases so that it could be presented like women leading the box office in major action superhero roles. For a long time, that was very far and few between, and they've tried to push some back into it. A lot of times they pushed and they haven't been good, and you see they aren't good. But when it finally happens, that's when women in those roles can start making that same kind of box office draw. This all comes back to it's an art, and while an art can actually shine light on different aspects of life, I don't ever want my art to be a voice for my opinions. I just don't think film should ever be a soapbox for somebody's political agenda. You can't be politically correct as an actor.
No, you can't.
This us trying to force the agenda onto the art itself really, really bugs me. I don't mind the art reflecting some of that, calling into question some of that, raising issues about equality. I think that's great, and it should do that. But to feel like your art has to be politically correct, man, that's just a dangerous. I don't want to see movies like that.
For better or for worse, it's got buzz, it's got word of mouth. People are showing up, they're buying tickets. STX made a wise investment buying this property off of the Weinstein Group when it went bankrupt. This film was supposed to come out over a year ago, and it didn't because of everything going on with Harvey Weinstein and the group going into bankruptcy. And they say, no press is ever bad press. And whether people are talking about it because they're enjoying the film or they're talking about it because they have differing opinions about Bryan Cranston as a thespian playing a quadriplegic role, whatever it is, they're showing up to theaters, they're making their own judgments, and those judgments are, for the most part, good. Like I said, critics, not so much, 40% on Rotten Tomatoes, but Cinema Score, the people buying the tickets and putting their butts in those seats, gave this movie an A. So it's been a successful vehicle for STX, good, bad, or otherwise, taking everything into account.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks. Number 1.
And so that brings us to our number 1 movie at the box office this week, Glass from Universal. Took in $40.5 million on 3,841 screens for a per-screen average of $10,567. Its total gross sits at $40.5 million on just a $20 million budget. Now, this film had a lot of hype going into it because here we are revisiting a fresh property in Split with James McAvoy, but also then tying it into one of Shyamalan's first films, being Unbreakable with Samuel L. Jackson and Bruce Willis. Here we are seeing M. Night Shyamalan coming back into form. I mean, his films are now back up to making the box office bank and giving him the credibility that he hadn't had for a pretty long stretch of time. But, you know, you look at Glass versus other M. Night Shyamalan pieces, and Glass is the third highest opening weekend for one of his films, only topped by The Village and Signs. I'm interested to see this. I liked Unbreakable. I thought it was the biggest middle finger to the superhero film genre that they could give, which...
Except there was no superhero genre at the time.
There wasn't. So that's what makes this film all the much more interesting to want to go out and see. Like, okay, now we're in this landscape that is full, just oversaturated with superhero product. Is this film, which is the anti-superhero film, does it stick to that? You know, does it stick to being the middle finger to the superhero genre? And that's part of my main reasoning for wanting to see this.
I'm very interested in seeing it. I saw Unbreakable. In fact, I think Unbreakable is M. Night's best film, personally. I have not seen Split, so I have to see Split before I see Glass. So it's on my list to try to see sometime in the next couple of weeks so that I can see this.
Talking about the kind of audience reaction and stuff, Glass has a 35% on Rotten Tomatoes and a B on Cinema Score. So it seems, at least right now in the opening weekend, it's a little bit of a mixed bag.
Probably going to see a big drop next week.
It will all depend on word of mouth from here on out. And if the word of mouth is as mixed as it currently looks, then yeah, I think, you know, we're going to see that drop Whether it's exaggerated above 50%, I don't know, because it still will be in the most theaters of anything that's out there. It still will probably have the most marketing of any of the films that are currently out. So it'll be interesting to see what Glass does next weekend. So we have 2 new wide releases next week. Looking ahead, we have The Kid Who Would Be King from Fox and Serenity, starring Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway. Do you see either of these films possibly unseating Glass, or?
I actually think Glass is going to drop and the Upside's going to retake the number 1 spot.
Really? Okay, that's an interesting approach to it. You don't think that either The Kid Who Would Be King or Serenity will outperform Upside?
The only thing I know about this Kid Who Would Be King movie, one, it hasn't got a whole lot of marketing. I haven't even seen a preview for this film. Yeah, I don't think this is going to make that much of a dent. So I don't think this one is even going to remotely get close to number 1. Whereas with Serenity, it might, but I think Serenity and Glass are going to affect each other. So it'll depend on, if those 2 films are at the same theater, I think that will split the take on their revenue.
So what you're saying is you see Glass dropping enough and Upside reclaiming number 1.
I think Upside will reclaim number 1, and Glass and Serenity will fight for 2 and 3.
It's really going to come down to what Glass does its second weekend. If it takes a 50% hit, it stays at number 1. If it takes anything more exaggerated than that, if it looks at 60, 65%, then you may very well be right. We may be looking at the Upside reclaiming number 1.
Yeah, who knows? I don't win. This is why I don't play the lottery.
Well, we'll just have to see how the numbers shake out next week. But at least for us right now, that wraps it up for us here on this episode of The Weekend Take. Again, I want to thank Michael Babbitt for joining me as our co-host this week.
Thank you, Sean, very much. I appreciate it. I hope it was up to standards.
More of it is everyone propping me up at this point. I do want to encourage everyone, though, to certainly check out Bombshell Studios and The Last in Line. So, Michael, if you just want to hit us with that website one more time. It'll be in the episode description as well. But
the website for it is 40kilo.bombshellstudios.com.
So, yeah, be sure to check out updates coming in from Bombshell Studios and The Last in Line on Twitter at Bombshell Films, and as well as on Instagram, also at Bombshell Films.
I just want to say, for the last thing that I say, please support independent film.
Every artist out there deserves the support of people, because all of us are just sitting in a dark room together watching a film. We may not know the history behind what got that film started up to the point that we're all sitting in this dark room watching it. But when you see someone with a project, with a film, please support them, especially independent film, because not all of us have big studio backing or bank checks.
I would venture to say that almost all of us don't have big studio backing and checks backing us.
That about does it for us here on The Weekend Take. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. On Twitter, we are at Weekend Take for daily box office updates and news. So until next week, thank you all and have a great day.
You've been listening to The Weekend Take. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and Google Play and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks.